My father's hands were shaking so hard I could hear the rhythmic clatter of his ceremonial rings against the podium. He was the alpha of the Mooncrest, a man who claimed to be a mountain, but was currently acting more like a bowl of jelly in a thunderstorm. Across the neutral clearing, the Alpha King's blackguard stood in terrifying, silent formation. They didn't need weapons. Their presence was the threat. They were waiting for their tribute. A human currency to pay for a debt my father was too weak to fight. I saw the lead guard reaching for my sister, Mia. She was 19, soft-hearted, and currently crying hard enough to flood the valley. I didn't think. I just moved. I shoved the lead guard so hard he stumbled into a rosebush and I stepped into the light. "Take me," I barked, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm sturdier, I'm meaner, and I'm definitely a better cook. Plus, if you take Mia, I'll spend every waking hour tracking you down just to annoy you into submission." Welcome to Daniella's Romance Library, your sanctuary for the most intense and fated shifter stories ever told. Before we lose ourselves in today's episode, I want to invite you into the heart of our community. Head down to the comments right now and let the pack know, where are you listening from today? I will read every single one. With that being said, let's get back to the king. Chapter 1. The Tactical Trade. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath, staring at the line of armored SUVs and the wall of muscle blocking the forest exit. I put on my favorite Save the World boots for this? My father, Alpha Zev, looked like he was about to faint. "Eris, get back in line. This is a diplomatic negotiation, not one of your reckless rescue missions." "Diplomatic?" I let out a sharp, jagged laugh that echoed through the clearing. "Dad, you're literally trembling in your loafers while they prepare to haul Mia off like a piece of luggage. I'm not getting back in line. I'm cutting it." I stepped past the perimeter, ignoring the gasp of the Mooncrest elders. I walked straight toward the center of the clearing, stopping only when I was 10 feet away from the captain of the Blackguard. Up close, he was less of a man and more of a boulder with a very expensive haircut. "I'm the trade," I said, crossing my arms over my chest and tilting my chin up. "Eris Thorne, eldest daughter, lead strategist, and currently the only person in this clearing with the spine to look you in the eye. Mia stays. I go. Do we have a deal, or are we going to stand here until my father's spray tan starts to run?" The captain stared at me, his face a mask of stone. "The king's decree was for the youngest, not the difficult one. The difficult one comes with a much higher IQ and a working knowledge of how to fix your terrible logistics," I countered, refusing to blink. "Consider it a free upgrade. Think of Mia as a fragile glass vase and me as a titanium kettle. I'm much more useful in a high-pressure environment." Behind me, Mia let out a choked sob. I didn't look back. If I looked back, I'd lose my edge. I needed to be the iron shield I'd always been. "Secure her," the captain commanded, though there was a flicker of something that looked like amusement, or maybe pity in his eyes. They didn't use chains. The Alpha King's guard didn't need them. They simply surrounded me, their sheer physical presence creating a wall of heat and muscle that made the air feel thin. I was ushered into the back of a blacked-out SUV that smelled like expensive leather and a very intimidating cologne. "Is there a snack bar in here, or is captive a strictly calorie-deficit lifestyle?" I asked the guard sitting across from me. He didn't answer, but I saw his jaw twitch. Small victories. We drove for hours, climbing higher into the jagged peaks where the air grew thin and cold. The citadel appeared through the mist like a crown made of obsidian and light. It was breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly permanent. As the gates hummed open, a strange vibration started in my chest. It wasn't fear. It was a magnetic pull, a low-frequency hum that seemed to match the rhythm of my own heart. The car stopped in a massive courtyard, lined with white marble. The door was opened, and the captain gestured for me to exit. "The Alpha King is waiting. Try to keep the commentary to a minimum, for your own sake." "No promises," I whispered, stepping out. I was led through corridors that looked like they belonged in a museum. finally stopping before a set of towering gold-leafed doors. The captain pushed them open, and the scent hit me first. Cedarwood, rain-slicked stone, and a raw, masculine power that made my wolf stand at attention and stop growling for the first time in a decade. At the far end of the room, standing before a window that looked out over the entire world, was Valerius. He turned slowly, his silver eyes locking onto mine. He was taller than the roomers, his presence so heavy it felt like the room had lost its gravity. I took a breath, preparing my first insult, but the king didn't give me the chance. He didn't move toward me. He didn't speak. He simply opened his mouth and let out a roar, a primal, earth-shattering sound that vibrated through my bones and shattered the glass of a nearby vase. I braced myself for an attack, but then his voice cut through the ringing in my ears, deep and resonant. "Welcome home," he said, the silver in his eyes flashing with a possessive heat. "My queen." My brain stalled. "I'm sorry. Your what?" Chapter 2, The Golden Dungeon. "I'm sorry, your what?" I stood frozen in the middle of the throne room, my tactical boots feeling suddenly very heavy on the polished marble. I looked around for a hidden camera, or perhaps a court jester about to jump out and tell me I'd been pranked. The Blackguard captains were currently wearing expressions that suggested they were reconsidering their career choices, and Valerius, the Alpha King himself, was watching me with an intensity that made my skin feel 2 sizes too small. "My queen," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave into a low, rumbling purr that I felt in my molars. "The bond is screaming it. Can you not feel the mountain itself bowing to you?" "Actually, all I feel is a slight ringing in my ears because someone decided to roar in a closed room with terrible acoustics," I countered, crossing my arms. "And for the record, I'm a tribute, a captive, a diplomatic bargaining chip. Queen implies a lot of paperwork and probably a much more uncomfortable wardrobe than I'm currently wearing." Valerius took a single step toward me. He didn't move like a king. He moved like a storm front. "You volunteered to save a sister you barely resemble in spirit. You walked into the den of the most powerful pack in the hemisphere and started critiquing our logistics. You aren't a captive, Eris. You're a miracle." "I'm a headache," I corrected. "And I'd like to see my cell now. Somewhere with a lock and ideally a lack of silver-eyed men making grand proclamations." He didn't argue. He signaled to the captain, but his eyes never left mine. "Show the queen to her chambers. Ensure she has everything she desires. If she asks for the moon, find a way to bring it to her." I was led away by a very confused-looking guard. We walked through half a mile of hallway that looked like it had been decorated by someone with an unlimited budget and a passion for velvet. Finally, he stopped at a pair of double doors that looked like they belonged on a cathedral. "Your, cell, my lady."
"Thanks,
the guard
Dave,"
muttered, I said, though his name tag definitely said Marcus. I walked in and the door clicked shut. I immediately went to work. The room was disgusting, and by disgusting, I mean it was a 5-star royal suite with a walk-in closet the size of my father's house and a bed that looked like it was made of clouds. I checked the windows, 3 stories up, sheer drop. I checked the vents, too small. Finally, I turned to the door. I pulled a bobby pin from my hair, kneeling down to the ornate gold lock. "Okay, Valerius," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see how your queen handles a bit of lockpicking." I twisted the pin, listening for the mechanical click of the tumbler. Click. I grinned, standing up and throwing the door open, ready to make my grand, stealthy escape. Instead, I walked straight into a wall of solid, warm muscle. Valerius was leaning against the opposite wall of the hallway, holding a delicate porcelain saucer and a steaming cup of tea. He didn't look angry. He looked delighted. "Impressive," he said, checking his watch. "Under 40 seconds. Though the lock was already open, Eris. I don't keep my heart behind bars." "I was testing the security," I snapped, trying to ignore the way he smelled like rain and cedar. "And what is that?" "Chamomile with a hint of honey," he said, offering the cup. "I noticed you were twitching during the ceremony. Your wolf is restless. This helps. I don't want your tea, I said, though the steam was making my mouth water. I want to know why you aren't treating me like a prisoner. Where are the chains? Where's the butcher energy I was promised? He stepped into the room, forcing me to back up. He set the tea on a mahogany side table and then turned to me, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second. I have enough enemies, Eris. I've been waiting 20 years for a partner. He reached out, his fingers ghosting over the pulse point in my neck. The mountain told me you were coming. It just forgot to mention you'd be this much trouble. He leaned in, his lips inches from my ear. Sleep well. Tomorrow we negotiate. And I should warn you, I'm very good at getting what I want. He left before I could come up with a witty retort. I slammed the door and locked it, for real this time. But as I turned toward the bed, I noticed something on the pillow. A small hand-carved wooden wolf, identical to the one I used to carry as a child. My heart did a backflip. How did he know? Chapter 3. The First Negotiation. I spent the rest of the night staring at that wooden wolf. It was a perfect replica of the one I'd lost when my pack was attacked 5 years ago. The one thing I'd held on to when the world felt like it was ending. Either Valerius was a psychic, or he'd been doing some very deep, very creepy background checks. By the time the sun hit the balcony, I was in full tactical mode. I put on the most intimidating outfit I could find in the closet. A sleek black silk jumpsuit that looked like it cost more than my father's annual budget. And headed for the dining hall. If I was going to be a queen, I was going to be a queen who demanded an audit of the pantry. I found Valerius at a long table that could easily seat 50 people. He was alone, reading a tablet and looking effortlessly kingly in a simple gray shirt that strained against his shoulders. Ah, you're awake, he said, not looking up. I took the liberty of ordering the pancakes. I hear you have a weakness for maple syrup. I have a weakness for transparency and not being stalked, I said, sliding into the chair at the opposite end of the table. How did you get that carving, Valerius? And don't give me any of that "the mountain told me" nonsense. He finally looked up, his silver eyes shimmering with amusement. Your sister told me. When I sent the guard to collect your things, she practically gave them a guided tour of your childhood trauma. She seems to think I'm your hero. I didn't have the heart to tell her I'm just a man who really likes your attitude. Mia is 19 and thinks everyone with a crown is a Disney prince. I sighed, stabbing a pancake with more force than necessary. Now, let's talk business. You called me queen. You claimed a bond. Fine. But I have conditions for my residency. Conditions? He leaned back, crossing his arms. I'm the Alpha King Eris. Usually I'm the one setting the terms. And usually your tributes aren't me, I countered. Rule 1. No growling before 9 a.m. It's uncivilized. Rule 2. I have full access to your strategic maps and pack records. If I'm going to be stuck here, I might as well fix your border patrol issues. Rule 3. Know my queen in public until I've decided if I even like your last name. Valerius watched me, his expression unreadable. I expected him to laugh or pull rank. Instead, he stood up and walked the entire length of the table, stopping right beside my chair. He leaned down, his hands on the armrests, effectively caging me in. I'll agree to your terms, he whispered, his scent flooding my senses until I forgot what Rule 4 was supposed to be. On one condition of my own. Which is? I asked, my voice slightly breathier than I intended. 1 hour a day, he said. In my presence. No politics, no maps, no sisterly rescues. Just you and me. Let me show you who I am, Eris. Not the king, but the man. That sounds suspiciously like a date, I noted. It's a negotiation of the soul, he corrected, his thumb brushing against my jawline. The sparks from the contact sent a jolt of pure electricity through my wolf, making her howl with delight. I was about to agree, mostly because my brain had temporarily short-circuited, when the heavy doors of the dining hall burst open. A scout ran in, looking pale and clutching a leather scroll. My king, the southern border, the scout panted. The elders. They've invoked the trial of blood. They're claiming Eris Thorne isn't a mate, but a spy sent to assassinate you. They're demanding her execution before the sun sets." Valerius went still. The air in the room suddenly felt like it was freezing. He didn't look at the scout. He looked at me, his silver eyes turning a dark, stormy gray. "Execute my mate," he whispered, and the glass on the table began to vibrate. "They're going to need a bigger mountain." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the butcher the legends spoke of. "Eris, stay in this room. Do not open the door for anyone." "Like hell," I said, standing up and grabbing a steak knife. "If someone's planning my execution, I'm going to be the one to tell them how poorly they've planned it." Chapter 4. The Council of Fools. "Eris, I am not joking," Valerius growled, his voice vibrating through the floorboards. "The Council of Elders are not men of reason. They are relics of a time when justice meant a hollow grave and a short prayer. Stay. Here." "And I'm not joking either," I snapped, tossing the steak knife into the air and catching it by the hilt just to prove I could. "You want a queen? Then watch a queen work. If you lock me in this room while they debate my head's relocation, the first thing I'll do when I get out is audit your private wine cellar and replace everything with non-alcoholic grape juice." Valerius paused, a flicker of genuine horror crossing his regal features. For an alpha king, he had a very refined palate. "You wouldn't." "Try me," I said, already marching toward the door. "I've survived 19 years of my father's diplomacy. These elders are just bullies with more wrinkles. Lead the way, Valerius, or move aside." He let out a sigh that sounded like a collapsing mountain range, but he stepped in line beside me. "Fine, but if they start throwing ancient law books at you, stay behind me." The council chamber was a circular room made of white stone that felt more like a tomb than a courtroom. 12 elders sat on high-backed chairs, looking like they hadn't seen a smile or a carb since the last century. At the center of the floor was a red circle, the marking for the trial of blood. "Alpha King," the head elder rasped, his eyes milky with age and prejudice. "You bring the spy into our presence? The Mooncrest blood is tainted. This girl was not sent as a mate. She was sent to weaken the throne." "The only thing weakening the throne is the smell of mothballs in this room," I announced, stepping into the center of the circle. Valerius reached for my arm, but I brushed him off, fixing the elders with my best tactical strategist glare. "Silence, girl," the elder hissed. "The law states that a captive taken in trade cannot be a mate. It is a conflict of interest. Your execution is a necessity for the stability of the North." "A conflict of interest?" I let out a dry, sharp laugh. "Let's talk about interests. You want me dead because if the king has a mate who understands logistics, he'll realize that the protection fees you've been skimming from the border packs have been funding your summer estates in the South. I've been in this citadel for 12 hours, and I've already found 3 discrepancies in your grain tax records. You don't want a spy dead. You want an accountant silenced." The room went deathly quiet. Valerius stiffened beside me, his silver eyes narrowing as he looked at the elders. "Is this true, Elder Garrow?" "She lies!" Garrow shrieked, his hands trembling. "She is a witch. She uses words to bewitch the mind." "I use math to bewitch the mind," I corrected, pulling a crumpled piece of parchment from my jumpsuit pocket, a scrap I'd swiped from the dining hall's ledger. "According to this, you've been charging the Mooncrest for 500 guards, but your barracks only house 300. Where's the gold, Garrow, in your pocket, or are you just really bad at counting?" Valerius stepped forward, his presence expanding until the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. "The trial of blood is for enemies of the state," he whispered, his voice a low, lethal promise. "Stealing from my people makes you the enemy." The elders scrambled, their ancient dignity dissolving into a frantic huddle. But Garrow wasn't finished. He stood up, pointing a gnarled finger at me. "If she is truly your mate, then let her prove it. The bond test. If she survives the touch of the sovereign stone, she stays. If not, the mountain will claim its own." Valerius paled. No, the stone is unstable. It hasn't been used in generations. I'll do it, I said, looking at the black, jagged rock sitting on a pedestal at the back of the room. It hummed with a dark, magnetic energy that made my wolf's fur stand on end. Eris, don't, Valerius warned, his hand finding the small of my back. It's a death sentence for anyone who isn't a true match. Then it's a good thing I'm a perfectionist, I said, stepping toward the stone. I reached out, my fingers trembling just an inch from the cold, black surface. The moment my skin touched the rock, a shock of violet lightning arced through the room, throwing the elders from their seats and knocking Valerius back. The world went white, and for a second, I wasn't in the chamber anymore. I was standing on a peak of pure ice, and a voice, ancient and booming, whispered a single word. Finally. The light faded, and I stood there, my hand still on the stone, which was now glowing a soft, steady gold. I turned back to the elders, who were groveling on the floor. So, I said, my voice sounding strangely echoed. About those tax returns? But Valerius wasn't looking at the stone. He was looking at the doors. They had been blasted off their hinges, and a massive, jet-black wolf stood there, its eyes a familiar, terrified blue. Mia, I whispered. My sister hadn't been saved. She had been followed, and behind her, the shadow of a much larger, darker pack was emerging from the mist. Chapter 5. The Sensory Bond. Eris, get behind me, Valerius commanded, his voice no longer the rumbling purr of a mate, but the steel-cold order of a king. I didn't listen. I never do. I ran straight for Mia, who had shifted back into her human form, huddled on the cold stone floor and shivering. I threw my silk jacket over her shoulders, pulling her close. Mia, what happened? Why are you here? You were supposed to be safe at home. They came right after you left, she sobbed, clutching my arms. Not the king's men, others. They said the Alpha King stole the true key, and they were here to take it back. They followed me through the secret pass. The true key? I looked up at Valerius. What is she talking about? Valerius didn't answer. He was staring at the line of shadows standing in the doorway. They weren't shifters. Not exactly. They were void walkers, ancient rivals who lived in the lightless valleys below the peaks. They didn't want land. They wanted the sovereign stone. And I had just turned it on. The girl is the key, the lead voidwalker rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over a grave. The stone only glows for the blood of the first queen. You've brought us exactly what we needed, Alpha King. Valerius let out a roar that actually cracked the white stone floor. He shifted in a blur of fur and muscle, becoming a massive silver wolf that stood 6 feet at the shoulder. He lunged, but the voidwalkers didn't fight. They dissolved into smoke, reappearing 10 feet away. We do not fight tonight, the shadow said, its eyes fixed on me. We wait. The bond has been struck. Now, the hunger begins. Let's see if your king can keep his sanity when the fever hits. With a flick of darkness, they were gone. The room was silent, save for Mia's ragged breathing and the soft, rhythmic thrumming of the sovereign stone. Valerius shifted back, his skin slick with sweat, his eyes still swirling with silver fire. He walked toward me, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. The moment he got within 3 feet of me, a wall of heat hit me. It wasn't the warmth of a fire, it was a physical, magnetic pull so strong it felt like my very cells were trying to jump out of my skin and merge with his. Eris, he choked out, clutching the edge of the council table. The stone. It didn't just prove the bond, it accelerated it. What does that mean? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. My wolf was pacing in my mind, whining with a desperate, primal need to be near him. I felt dizzy, the scent of cedar and rain becoming so overwhelming it was the only thing I could taste. The fever, Garrow whispered from the floor, his face pale. The sovereign stone bypasses the years of wooing. It forces the souls together. If they aren't mated within the next 12 hours, the power will burn them both from the inside out. I looked at Valerius. He looked back at me, and I saw the absolute, terrifying hunger in his gaze. He wasn't the man who brought me tea anymore. He was a predator who had finally found his home. "Mia, go with Marcus," I said, my voice sounding far away. "Go now." "But Eris—" "Go!" I barked. As the guards hurried Mia out, Valerius moved. He was across the room in a heartbeat, his hands slamming into the wall on either side of my head. The heat coming off him was intoxicating. I reached out, my fingers brushing the bare skin of his chest, and a jolt of electricity surged through me so violently my knees buckled. He caught me, his arms like iron bands around my waist. I can't stop it, Eris," he groaned against my neck. "Everything in me is screaming to claim you." "Then stop talking," I whispered, my fierce independence warring with a desire so intense it was frightening. I grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him down. "We're strategists, remember? Let's figure this out." He didn't laugh. He picked me up, my legs instinctively wrapping around his waist, and carried me toward the royal wing. Every touch felt like a brand. Every breath he took against my skin, making my wolf howl for more. But as we reached the doors to his private chambers, the sovereign stone in the distant hall let out a high-pitched mourning wail. I looked over Valerius's shoulder and saw the glow of the stone turning from gold to a deep blood red. "Valerius," I gasped, pointing back. "The stone. It's not done with us." Chapter 6. The Unimpressed Guest. "The stone can wait for its turn in line," Valerius growled, his voice a low vibration against my collarbone. He kicked the doors to his chambers shut, the heavy oak thudding with a finality that made my pulse jump. He set me down on the edge of a bed that was large enough to house a small pack, but he didn't let go. His hand stayed on my waist, his thumbs tracing the line of my hips through the black silk of my jumpsuit. The fever was no longer a metaphor. My skin felt like it was simmering, and every time his breath hit my neck, a new wave of shivers raced down my spine. "So," I said, trying to regain some semblance of my usual wit, though my voice was a few octaves higher than I liked. "Is this the part where you tell me you have a really great collection of ancient coins to show me?" Valerius paused, his forehead resting against mine. A small, strained smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I have several, actually. But I suspect you'd find the silver content lacking compared to the current situation." "Good call," I whispered, reaching up to thread my fingers through the dark hair at the nape of his neck. The contact was like a spark hitting a powder keg. Valerius let out a jagged breath, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below my ear. It wasn't just physical. I could feel his soul through the bond, a vast, swirling storm of possessiveness, relief, and a bone-deep loneliness that was finally being filled. "You're so loud," he murmured against my skin. "Excuse me? I haven't said a word." "Your wolf," he corrected, his hand sliding up to cup my cheek. "She's roaring, Eris. She's claiming this room, this castle, and me. I've never heard anything so beautiful." I felt a flush creep up my face that had nothing to do with the fever. "Well, she has high standards, and she thinks your curtains are tacky." "I'll have them burned tomorrow," he promised, his silver eyes locking onto mine. The humor faded, replaced by an intensity that made the air feel thick. "Eris, I know you volunteered to save your sister. I know you didn't choose this. If you want me to stop, if you want to fight this, tell me now. I will lock myself in the vault if I have to." I looked at him, the Alpha King who had every right to demand, but was instead asking. I thought about the moon crest, about a life spent being a shield for people who didn't appreciate the weight of the metal. Then I looked at the bond, the golden thread that made me feel like I was finally, for the first time in my life, exactly where I was supposed to be. "Valerius," I said, my voice steadying. "I've spent my whole life being difficult because it was the only way to keep my soul. But with you, I don't feel like I'm losing myself. I feel like I'm finding the rest of the map. I pulled him down, our lips meeting in a kiss that tasted like cedar, honey, and the beginning of a revolution. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was two alphas finally finding a match they couldn't outmaneuver. But as the heat reached a crescendo, the room suddenly jerked. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a rhythmic, heavy thud, like a giant heart beating beneath the floorboards. Valerius pulled back, his eyes darting to the floor. The Sovereign Stone's red light was now visible through the cracks in the door, pulsing in time with the thuds. "The stone isn't proving the bond, Eris," Valerius whispered, his face going pale. "It's feeding on it." The floorboards near the bed suddenly splintered, and a sprout of jagged black crystal, the same material as the stone, shot up from the ground, growing a foot every second. "The Void Walkers," I gasped, jumping back. "They didn't want to steal the stone. They wanted to plant it." I looked out the balcony window and saw the same black crystals erupting all over the mountainside, glowing with that same sickly red light. The mountain wasn't bowing to us anymore. It was being eaten. Chapter 7. The Midnight Run. If I wanted a room full of jagged black rocks, I would have stayed in my father's basement, I snapped, diving off the bed just as another crystal sprout pierced the mattress like an obsidian spear. Valerius was on his feet in a blur, his silver eyes flashing with a mix of primal protective instinct and sheer royal outrage. He caught my arm, pulling me toward the balcony as the floor groaned under the weight of the erupting stones. The air in the room was growing thick with the scent of ozone and something ancient and rot-adjacent. "The Sovereign Stone is a conduit," Valerius shouted over the sound of splintering wood. "The Void Walkers aren't just eating the mountain, they're using our bond as the battery. The more we lean into the fever, the faster those crystals grow." "So you're saying my attraction to you is literally terraforming the landscape into a goth nightmare?" I asked, sidestepping a shard that nearly took off my favorite boot. "That is the worst it's not you, it's me excuse I've ever heard." "Eris, focus." He grabbed a heavy iron fire poker and smashed a crystal that was blocking the doorway. "We need to get to the lower barracks. Mia and the guards are trapped in the secondary ward. If the crystals reach the foundations, the entire citadel will slide off the peak." We burst into the hallway, which was now a labyrinth of glowing red thorns. The fever was still screaming in my veins, making every brush of Valerius's shoulder feel like a lightning strike. But the adrenaline was finally giving me back my tactical edge. "The stone is in the council chamber," I noted, pointing toward the pulsating red glow at the end of the hall. "If we break the source, do the sprouts stop?" "The stone is indestructible by physical means," Valerius said, his voice tight. "It requires a harmonic resonance. A king and a queen acting in total sync. But right now, my sync is occupied by the overwhelming urge to pin you to the wall and ignore the apocalypse." "Well, keep your royal urges in your pants for another 20 minutes, I grunted, leaping over a chest-high crystal formation. "We're going to the stables." "The stables?" Valerius looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "We can shift, Eris. We don't need horses." "We aren't taking horses. We're taking the mountain." I led him to a small hidden service lift I'd scouted on my way in. "The Void Walkers are using the stone to mimic the mountain's pulse. If we can get to the high ridges, the real heart of the peak, we can override their signal, but we have to do it as wolves. No human filters." We hit the ground floor and sprinted toward the rear exit. The cold mountain air hit my face, and for a second, the fever dimmed just enough for me to breathe. Valerius didn't wait for a signal. He shifted mid-stride, his silver fur shimmering under the blood-red moon. He let out a low, inviting whimper, tossing his head toward the high ridges. I shifted behind him, my smaller, sleek white wolf form landing silently on the frost. The bond between us shifted too. It was no longer a frantic, sweaty human mess. It was a broad, telepathic highway of scent, instinct, and raw power. "Follow me, my king," I projected, my paws finding purchase on the vertical rock face. We ran. Not away from the danger, but deeper into the belly of the storm. The crystals were erupting from the ground all around us, but as we climbed higher, away from the stone's physical location. The air grew pure. We reached the highest ridge, a narrow spine of granite that looked out over the entire north. Below us, the citadel was glowing like a dying ember. I looked at Valerius, our muzzles inches apart. The fever was back, but here, in the wild, it felt like a weapon rather than a weakness. We stood on the edge of the world, and I realized what we had to do. We didn't need to break the stone. We needed to give it a better master. I let out a long, melodic howl that carried the weight of the moon crest and the fire of the throne. Valerius joined me, his deep, resonant bass vibrating through the very granite beneath our paws. For a moment, the red glow of the crystals flickered. Then a voice hissed from the shadows behind a nearby boulder. A lovely duet. Too bad the mountain already chose its side. Garrow, the head elder, stepped out. But he wasn't human anymore. His skin was translucent, filled with the same black crystal that was eating the citadel, and he was holding my sister by the throat. Chapter 8. The Hidden Vulnerability. My wolf let out a snarl that sounded like a saw hitting a bone. I felt Valerius's hackles rise beside me, his silver fur bristling as his shadow elongated, blacker than the night. Garrow, or the thing that used to be Garrow, smiled, a sound like cracking glass. The Sovereign Stone is ancient, Eris. It doesn't care about mates or romance. It cares about legacy, and the Thorne bloodline has been its favorite meal for 1,000 years. He tightened his grip on Mia. My sister's eyes were wide, her face pale, but she wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at me, a silent message in her gaze. Do it. Valerius, I projected, my mind racing. He's a conduit. He's not just holding her, he's using her as a lightning rod for the stone's hunger. If we attack him directly, the feedback will kill her. The silver wolf moved with a calculated, terrifying stillness. I see it, the crystal in his chest. It's the anchor. If we can shatter the anchor without breaking the circuit, she survives. You speak of legacy, Garrow, I barked, shifting back into my human form in a flurry of white light. I stood on the granite ridge, shivering in the cold but refusing to show it. But you're just a parasite. You're eating the very thing you claim to protect. How long until there's nothing left of the North for you to rule? Long enough to see your king fall, Garrow hissed. He raised his free hand, and a wave of black crystal shards erupted from the ground between us. I didn't move. I knew Valerius was already in motion. He didn't lunge at Garrow. He lunged at the ridge beneath Garrow's feet. With a roar that wasn't just a sound but a physical concussive wave, Valerius slammed his paws into the granite. The ridge didn't just crack, it shattered. Garrow stumbled, his grip on Mia loosening for a fraction of a second. Now! Valerius's voice echoed in my head. I didn't reach for a knife. I reached for the bond. I pulled on the fever, on the gold-red fire in my veins, and I didn't fight the hunger. I gave it to Garrow. I funneled the overwhelming, agonizing heat of the fated mate bond directly into the black crystal in his chest. The stone couldn't handle the resonance. It was designed to feed on slow, steady energy, not the white-hot explosion of two alphas finally surrendering to each other. Garrow shrieked as the black crystal in his chest began to glow a blinding, molten gold. No, it's too much. You'll burn us all. That's the idea, I whispered. The explosion sent me flying backward. I hit the ground hard, the world spinning into a blur of gray and gold. When the smoke cleared, Garrow was gone. The black crystals on the mountain were turning to fine, harmless ash. Mia was lying a few feet away, gasping but alive. I crawled to her, pulling her into my arms. I've got you, I've got you. Valerius shifted back, looking exhausted and scorched. He stumbled toward us, his silver eyes searching mine. Is it over? The stone is silent, I said, looking down at the citadel. The red glow had vanished, replaced by the steady, warm gold of the morning sun. But Garrow wasn't the one in charge, Valerius. He was just the mouthpiece. I stood up, helping Mia to her feet. But as I turned to look back at the high peak, I saw it. A single, massive black crystal tower had survived, and at the top of it sat a man I hadn't seen since I was a child. A man who looked exactly like my father, but with eyes the color of a dead star. "Dad?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. The man didn't speak. He simply raised a hand, and the ground beneath us began to hum again. But this time, it wasn't a pulse. It was a countdown. Chapter 9. The Fever of the Fated. "That isn't our father," I said, my voice as cold as the frost on the granite. I stepped in front of Mia, my hand instinctively going to the small of my back, where I usually kept a tactical knife, only to remember I was currently in a shredded silk jumpsuit. "Our father is a coward. That man has a plan." Valerius stood beside me, his hand finding mine. The fever hadn't gone away. It had just evolved. Now that the stone was no longer draining us, the bond felt like a roaring furnace. Every time our skin touched, it felt like the world was being rewritten. "The doppelganger," Valerius murmured, his eyes fixed on the man atop the black tower. "A Voidwalker legend. A creature that takes the form of the one you trust most to deliver the final blow. He isn't your father, Eris. He's the mountain's shadow." The figure on the tower tilted his head, a slow, unnatural movement. "You always were the clever one, Eris," the voice said, sounding perfectly like Alpha Zev's disappointed baritone. "Always protecting everyone, always the shield. But who protects the shield when it starts to crack?" He snapped his fingers, and the ground beneath the ridge groaned. The countdown I felt in my bones accelerated. The black tower began to sink into the mountain, pulling the very peak down with it. "He's collapsing the high ridge," Valerius realized, his grip on my hand tightening. "If the peak falls, the pressure will cause a tectonic shift. Every pack in the north will be swallowed by the earth." "We need to get to that tower," I said, looking at the sheer drop between us and the obsidian structure. "And we need to do it before the fever turns into a literal meltdown. Valerius, look at your hands." He looked down. His skin was glowing with a soft, pulsing gold light. My own hands were doing the same. We were radiating enough energy to power the entire citadel. "The Sovereign Stone didn't just proving the bond," I whispered. "It turned us into a living battery. If we don't discharge this energy into something, we're going to explode." "Then let's give the mountain a new heart," Valerius said, his eyes meeting mine. There was no fear in them, only an absolute terrifying love. "Eris, if we do this, the bond will be permanent. No annulments, no escape. You'll be the Alpha Queen of the North until the stars go out." "I told you," I said, a small, fierce smile playing on my lips. "I'm a perfectionist. I don't do temporary." We didn't shift this time. We ran toward the edge of the ridge, and as we leaped into the void toward the black tower, we didn't fall. The golden energy between us formed a bridge of solid light, a physical manifestation of the bond. We landed on the obsidian platform, the doppelganger waiting for us. He didn't fight. He simply opened his arms. "Welcome to the end of the legacy." Valerius and I didn't use weapons. We used each other. We stepped together, our bodies pressing close, and as we shared a kiss that felt like the birth of a son, we released the fever. The golden light exploded outward, shattering the black tower into a million pieces. The doppelganger dissolved into ash and the mountain's collapse slowed, then stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. We stood on the broken remains of the tower, the golden glow slowly fading. Mia was safe on the far ridge, watching us with awe. But as I looked down at our joined hands, I noticed something. The golden light hadn't completely vanished. It had settled into our skin, forming two identical marks on our palms, a crown and a wolf intertwined. "It's done," Valerius whispered, pulling me into his arms. "Not quite," I said, looking at the horizon. A fleet of black SUVs, modern, high-tech, and definitely not the King's, was speeding toward the base of the mountain. And on the side of each vehicle was the logo of a corporation I recognized all too well. "Human hunters?" Valerius asked, his voice low. "Worse," I said, my heart sinking. The cleanup crew. My father didn't just trade me to save Mia. He sold the entire mountain to a mining conglomerate, and they're here to collect their property. Chapter 10. The Corporate Wolf. Mining conglomerate? Valerius repeated the words as if they were a foreign language. He looked down at the convoy of sleek charcoal SUVs snaking up the mountain pass, their headlights cutting through the dawn mist like the eyes of a different kind of predator. Eris, I am the king of this territory. No man sells a mountain that belongs to the wolves. My father doesn't see a mountain, Valerius. He sees a balance sheet, I said, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated fury against my ribs. I looked at the golden mark on my palm, the crown and the wolf, and felt the heat of it pulsing. He knew he couldn't beat you, and he knew he couldn't control me. So he did what he always does when a situation gets too difficult. He liquidated his assets. The lead vehicle stopped at the edge of the Citadel's main courtyard, where the black crystals had only just finished turning to ash. A man stepped out, wearing a suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan and holding a tablet like a shield. Behind him, men in tactical gear, distinctly human, but heavily armed with high-frequency sonic tech, began to deploy. "King Valerius!" the man called out, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "I am Director Zev's legal representative from Apex Resource Group. We have a signed deed of transfer for the mineral rights and land title for the Black Crest Range. You are currently trespassing on private corporate property." Valerius let out a laugh that was more of a snarl. He stepped to the edge of the ridge, the wind whipping his dark hair. "You stand on the bones of my ancestors, human. Your paper has no power here." "Actually," I shouted down, stepping up beside my mate. Section 4 of the Northern Pact Treaty, the one my father signed last year, allows for the transfer of stewardship in the event of a regional instability. He triggered the clause the moment the sovereign stone went red. He made it look like you lost control of the territory. The director looked up, squinting at me. "Ah, Eris. Always the smartest person in the room. Your father mentioned you might be uncooperative. He's already filed the paperwork for your rescue. He's claiming the king took you by force. The only force here is the one I'm about to use to kick you off this peak," I muttered. "Eris, stay back," Valerius whispered, his eyes turning that terrifying liquid silver. "They have sonic dampeners. If I shift, they'll scramble my nervous system." "Then don't shift," I said, a dangerous smirk playing on my lips. I looked at the mark on my palm and then at his. "We're a living battery, remember? They brought tech to a magic fight. Let's show them why the mountain doesn't like being owned." I grabbed Valerius's hand, interlocking our fingers. The golden glow returned instantly, more stable now, more focused. I didn't reach for the mountain's anger, I reached for its voice. I channeled the bond, the intimacy, and the fierce protectiveness I felt for Valerius into a single, focused frequency. "You want the minerals?" I whispered. "Then have them." I slammed my free hand into the granite. Instead of a roar, a low-frequency hum vibrated through the ground. It wasn't a physical shockwave, but a digital one. Every tablet, every radio, and every high-frequency dampener in the courtyard suddenly shrieked and burst into sparks. The director dropped his tablet as it began to smoke. The tactical teams stumbled, clutching their headsets as their communication systems fried. "The mountain doesn't have a deed," I yelled down, my voice amplified by the bond. "It has a soul, and she's currently very annoyed with your parking choices." Valerius looked at me, a look of pure, unshielded pride in his eyes. "My queen," he murmured, his voice thick with a sudden heavy heat that had nothing to do with the battle. But the director wasn't running. He was reaching into the SUV, pulling out a heavy metallic canister. "Plan B!" he shouted. He cracked the seal, and a thick neon green gas began to billow out, hugging the ground and moving with an unnatural speed toward the Citadel vents. "Wolfsbane!" Valerius hissed, his face going pale. "Weaponized aerosol!" "Mia!" I screamed, realizing my sister was still inside the lower halls. Chapter 11. The Vault of the Ancestors. The neon green mist moved like a sentient snake, pouring into the stone crevices of the citadel. It wasn't just poison, it was a neurotoxin designed to force a painful, partial shift in any lycanthrope who inhaled it. Within seconds, I heard the agonizing howls of the king's guard coming from the barracks below. Valerius, the air filtration system is in the north tower, I said, already moving. If that gas hits the lower levels, the pack won't just be sick, they'll be stuck in a half shift. They'll tear each other apart. Valerius grabbed my waist, his grip bruising but necessary. We can't go through the halls. The concentration is too high. The only way is through the ancestral vaults. The air down there is sealed by the Sovereign Stone's old energy. The vaults? I looked at the obsidian floor. The place where the crazy black crystals just came from? Sounds like a lovely Sunday stroll. It's the only way, Eris. Hold your breath. We didn't run. We plummeted. Valerius found a hidden stone lever near the ridge and a section of the mountain opened up, a slide of smooth granite dropping us hundreds of feet into the dark. We hit the bottom in a heap, the air down here smelling of dust, cold iron, and that strange, lingering honey scent of the bond. It was silent. Terrifyingly silent. The vaults were a labyrinth of ancient stone pillars, each carved with the history of the first alphas. The floor was a mosaic of raw emeralds and silver, glowing with a faint bioluminescent light. The Sovereign Stone was the heart, Valerius whispered, his voice echoing in the vast space. But these pillars are the lungs. If we can reach the central chamber, we can reverse the airflow and blow that gas back into the director's face. As we sprinted through the vault, the humor of our earlier bickering vanished. The stakes were no longer just about us. It was about every wolf in the citadel. I could feel Valerius's distress through the bond, a heavy, crushing weight of responsibility. "Hey," I said, pulling him to a stop for a second. I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. "We're doing this. You're the king. I'm the strategist. They brought a canister of gas to a kingdom of gods. We're going to win." Valerius looked at me, his silver eyes softening. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. The contact sent a wave of calm through the bond, a steady, grounding pulse. "I don't know what I did in a past life to deserve you, Eris Thorne. You probably saved a very important cat," I joked, though my heart was racing. "Now, where's the central chamber?" We reached a massive, circular door made of solid ironwood. It had no handle, no keyhole, only two handprints carved into the center. One for a king, one for a queen. "It's never just a button with you people, is it?" I sighed, placing my hand in the slot. Valerius placed his beside mine. The marks on our palms flared, the golden light bleeding into the wood. The door didn't just open, it dissolved into a shimmering veil of light. We stepped inside and I froze. The chamber wasn't empty. Standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a swirling vortex of green gas and golden light, was Mia. But her eyes weren't blue anymore. They were a glowing emerald green. "Mia," I whispered, my heart plummeting. "She's not your sister anymore, Eris," a voice echoed from the shadows. Out stepped my father, Alpha Zev. He wasn't wearing his suit or his fake tan. He was wearing a tactical mask, and he was holding a remote that was wired directly into a collar around Mia's neck. "She's the catalyst," my father said, his voice cold. "The Alpha King's mate was the bait, but the younger sister? She's the one with the genetic mutation that allows her to absorb the wolfsbane and project it. She's the bomb, Eris, and I'm the one with the finger on the trigger." Chapter 12. The Ink of the Abyss. "Dad, stop," I said, my voice trembling with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. "You're hurting her. Look at her eyes. She's suffering." "She's an asset, Eris. Something you never understood," my father said, stepping closer to the swirling vortex. "You were too fierce, too independent. But Mia? She was always the perfect, compliant tool." Apex paid me $50 million to deliver a bioweapon. I'm just fulfilling my contract. Valerius let out a low, guttural growl that shook the very pillars of the vault. You would sell your own blood for paper? I'd sell the whole world for the right price, Your Majesty. Zev sneered. Through the bond, I felt Valerius preparing to lunge. No, I projected, the word a frantic scream in his mind. The collar is a dead man's switch. If his heart stops or he lets go of that remote, it detonates the wolfsbane directly into her lungs. It'll kill everyone in the Citadel instantly. Valerius froze, his muscles tensed but his spirit caged. I looked at Mia. She was shaking, the green gas swirling around her like a toxic halo. She looked at me, a single tear tracking through the green glow of her eyes. Eris, she choked out. Please. I've got you, Mia. I promise, I said. But for the first time in my life, I didn't have a plan. The strategist was out of moves. Now, my father said, his thumb hovering over a large red button on the remote. Valerius, you're going to step into that containment cell in the corner. Eris, you're going to sign the digital transfer of the mountain rights. If either of you shifts, or if the Queen tries another one of her little frequency tricks, Mia dies. Valerius looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. He was ready to surrender. He was ready to walk into a cage for me. Wait, I said, my voice suddenly calm. I looked at the golden mark on my palm. Dad, you forgot one thing about the Northern Pact Treaty. What's that? He asked, his eyes narrowing. The Sovereign Stone doesn't just grant power, I said, taking a slow step forward. It creates a shared consciousness. I'm not just Eris Thorne, and he's not just Valerius. I reached out, but I didn't grab Valerius's hand. I reached for the air. I pulled on the bond, but I didn't use the gold light. I reached deeper, into the ink of the abyss, that dark, grounding shadow we had encountered during the collapse. I didn't discharge the energy. I absorbed it. The room went dark. Not the darkness of a turned-off light, but a physical, heavy void that swallowed the green gas, the golden pillars, and the light from my father's remote. What are you doing? My father screamed, his voice muffled as if he were underwater. I'm rewriting the contract, I whispered. In the absolute darkness, I felt the bond flare like a sun. I didn't need to see. I could feel Mia's heartbeat, the mechanical hum of the collar, and the frantic, shallow breaths of my father. I moved. I wasn't a woman. I was a shadow. I reached the collar, my fingers vibrating with the frequency of the abyss. I didn't break it. I unmade it. The atoms of the metal simply ceased to be. But as I pulled Mia away, the darkness shattered. My father was standing there, his face twisted in a mask of pure terror. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking behind me. I turned, and my heart stopped. Valerius was standing in the center of the room, but he wasn't a man, and he wasn't a silver wolf. He was something else, a creature of pure black shadow and silver fire, 10 feet tall, with wings made of shifting smoke. The fever hadn't just bonded us. It had triggered the final evolution of the Alpha King. Valerius, I whispered. The creature didn't answer. It turned its gaze toward the North Tower, where the director and his SUVs were waiting. With a single beat of its smoke wings, it vanished, leaving a trail of black ice on the floor. A second later, a roar echoed from above. A roar so powerful it didn't just shake the mountain. It felt like it shook the entire world. I looked at my father, who had fallen to his knees, his remote useless in his hand. Then I looked at the empty space where my maid had been. What have we done? I whispered. Chapter 13. The Shadow King's Wrath. The roar that tore through the citadel didn't just rattle the windows. It felt like it was trying to peel the skin off my bones. Valerius, or whatever that shadow monstrosity was, had left a trail of frost so cold it burned the air. I looked at the spot where he'd been standing, then back at my father, who was currently groveling on the floor of the vault, clutching his useless remote like a religious relic. "What did you do to him?" I hissed, grabbing my father by the lapels of his high-tech tactical vest and hauling him up. "That isn't a shift, Dad. That's a nightmare. I didn't know the wolfsbane would react with the Sovereign Stone's residue," my father stammered, his eyes darting toward the hole in the ceiling where Valerius had ascended. "Apex. They wanted the catalyst, Eris. They wanted to trigger the god shift. They don't want the minerals, they want a weapon they can control." "Well, congratulations," I snapped, shoved him back against the ironwood door. "You triggered it. But looking at that hole in the ceiling, I'd say your control just flew out the window." I turned to Mia. She was slumped against a pillar, the emerald glow in her eyes fading, replaced by a terrifyingly hollow gray. The toxin had been drained, but it had taken her strength with it. "Mia, stay with the guards," I commanded, my voice tight. "Don't move until I come back for you." "Eris, wait," she croaked, reaching for my hand. "The bond. It's not just a tether anymore. It's a fuse. If he destroys the mountain, you go with it. I can feel him, Eris. He's not angry. He's empty." I didn't wait for her to finish. I sprinted for the service lift, my mind racing. If Valerius was the shadow, I had to be the light. Not because I was some delicate flower, but because I was the only thing with a high enough frequency to interrupt his signal. I burst onto the main courtyard, and the scene was like a still frame from a horror movie. The Apex SUVs were tossed around like toy cars, crumpled and smoldering. The director and his men were nowhere to be seen, likely having fled into the forest. But the Shadow King was there. He was standing on the edge of the North Tower, his wings of smoke blotting out the sun. Every time he breathed, a wave of black ice spread across the stones. He wasn't attacking people. He was attacking the world. He was tearing the atmosphere apart, trying to find something to fill the void the stone had left inside him. "Valerius!" I screamed, the wind whipping my hair into a frenzy. He didn't turn. He let out another roar, and a bolt of silver lightning struck the high ridge, sending a shower of granite down toward the valley below. "Hey, Silver Eyes!" I yelled, cupping my hands around my mouth. "I know you're in there, and for the record, this is a terrible way to avoid doing the dishes." A wing of smoke twitched. Slowly, the creature turned. Its face was a shifting mask of shadow, but the eyes, those silver, soul-piercing eyes, were still there, buried deep in the darkness. "Eris," a voice whispered in my mind. It didn't sound like Valerius. It sounded like the mountain itself was grieving. "Run. The void. It wants everything." "I don't run," I said, stepping onto the frozen stones. "I strategize. And my current strategy involves you coming down here so we can talk about how much I hate your new look." I raised my palm, the golden mark glowing with a frantic, desperate heat. I wasn't just calling him. I was offering him my soul. I funneled every witty remark, every spark of chemistry, and every ounce of the fierce love I had tried so hard to deny into the bond. The Shadow King tilted his head. The smoke around him began to swirl faster, and for a second, I thought I saw the outline of a man. "Come home," I whispered. He launched himself off the tower. He didn't fly. He fell like a meteor. He hit the courtyard with a force that threw me off my feet, and as the smoke cleared, he was standing over me, a towering god of shadow. He reached out a hand made of black ice, his fingers inches from my throat. "Eris!" he rasped, the voice now a perfect, terrifying mimicry of my own. "Help me." Chapter 14. The Final Audit. The touch of his shadow fingers against my skin didn't burn. It froze. It was a cold so absolute it felt like it was pulling the very memories out of my brain. I stared up at the monstrosity that used to be my mate, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely speak. "Valerius, stop," I managed to gasp, my breath coming out as white puffs of steam. "This isn't the deal. 1 hour a day. Remember?" The Shadow King paused. The silver fire in his eyes flickered. the black ice on his fingers receding just a fraction. "The deal," the voice echoed, vibrating through my chest. "No growling. Before 9 a.m. "Exactly," I said, a shaky, desperate laugh escaping me. "And it's currently very much before 9 a.m. You're violating Article 3 of my residency." I reached up, my hand trembling as I pressed my glowing gold palm against his chest, right where his heart would be if he were still human. The moment we touched, the bond didn't just flare, it screamed. It was a sensory overload of cedar, rain, blood, and a hunger so vast it could swallow the galaxy. I didn't pull back. I pushed. I forced the golden energy of the fever into the void of his chest, acting like a human jumper cable. "Audit complete," I whispered. The darkness around him began to shatter like glass. Pieces of shadow fell to the courtyard, evaporating before they hit the ground. Valerius let out a choked human cry, his form flickering between the smoke god and the man. Finally, the void collapsed. Valerius fell into me, his heavy, solid weight slamming us both into the ice. He was human again, but he was freezing, his skin the color of marble. I wrapped my arms around him, trying to share my heat, the golden mark on my palm still pulsing with a fading light. "Eris," he breathed, his eyes fluttering open. The silver was dim, but it was back. You stayed." "I told you," I said, pulling him closer. "I'm a perfectionist. I don't leave a job half done." The silence of the courtyard was broken by the sound of boots on stone. I looked up, expecting my father or the director. Instead, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was wearing a lab coat under a heavy parka, and she was surrounded by a team of soldiers wearing a different logo, a white wolf inside a golden circle. "The Northern Oversight Committee," she announced, her voice clinical and cold. "We've been monitoring the energy spikes from the Sovereign Stone. Director Zev and Apex have been detained for treaty violations. However," she looked at Valerius, then at the marks on our palms. "The God Shift is a Class A extinction event," she said. "The Alpha King is no longer fit to rule, and the Queen, she is a liability. By the authority of the High Council, this mountain is now under quarantine. You have 10 minutes to say your goodbyes before the containment field is activated." "Containment field?" I stood up, helping a shaky Valerius to his feet. "You can't quarantine a king." "We aren't quarantining a king," the woman said, gesturing to the sky. A massive, translucent blue dome was descending over the entire Black Crest Range. It wasn't just a wall. It was a cage designed to drain all lycanthrope energy. "We're quarantining a weapon," she finished. Valerius looked at me, his face a mask of regal heartbreak. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden wolf he'd carved. He pressed it into my hand. "Go, Eris," he whispered. "Take Mia, the field. It will kill you if you stay. You're the Queen of the North. Rule from the outside. Find a way to break the dome." "I am not leaving you," I shouted, the wind picking up as the dome began to hum. "You aren't leaving me," he said, kissing my forehead. "You're saving the legacy. Go." The oversight soldiers moved toward us, their energy prods glowing. I looked at Valerius, then at Mia, who was being led toward a transport vehicle at the edge of the clearing. I had 10 minutes, but as I turned to follow the soldiers, the golden mark on my palm didn't fade. It began to burn with a new, dark violet light, the same light as the ink of the abyss. I looked back at the woman in the lab coat. "You want to talk about weapons?" I asked, a dark, dangerous smile spreading across my face. I didn't walk toward the transport. I walked toward the descending blue dome. "Eris, what are you doing?" Valerius cried out. "I'm rewriting the quarantine," I said. I raised my hand, and the violet light didn't just hit the dome, it absorbed it. The blue energy began to swirl into the mark on my palm, turning the air around me into a vortex of raw, uncontained power. "She's consuming the field," the woman shrieked, backing away. "Stop her!" But it was too late. The dome didn't just break, it inverted. The world went white. When my vision cleared, I was standing in the center of the courtyard. The oversight committee was gone, the transport was gone, even Valerius was gone. I was alone. But the mountain wasn't empty. I looked up at the high ridge and saw 1,000 pairs of glowing eyes watching me. And then a phone in my pocket, one I'd swiped from my father, began to ring. I answered it. "Hello, Eris," a voice said. It was the director from Apex. "I hope you like your new cage. Because the mountain isn't just under quarantine, it's currently being transported to a private island in the Pacific. Welcome to your new home, Queen." Chapter 15. The Sovereign's Horizon. The director's voice in my ear sounded like a death warrant wrapped in a business casual tone. I looked up, but I didn't see the sky. I saw a massive, shimmering grid of hexagonal force fields, and beyond them, the sickening blue of an endless ocean. The Black Crest hadn't just been quarantined. The entire mountain peak had been surgically excised from the earth and placed on a floating platform moving at 30 knots toward nowhere. "A private island?" I whispered, my voice echoing off the silent stone. "You really overshot the budget on this kidnapping, Director." "It's not a kidnapping, Eris. It's a preserve." The director's voice crackled through the phone. "The world isn't ready for a god shift. But Apex? We're ready to study it. Enjoy the view. It's the only one you'll have for the rest of your life." The line went dead. I smashed the phone against a rock, but the fury didn't fade. I was the queen of a mountain that was currently floating in the Pacific. My sister was missing, and my mate was... "Valerius!" I called out, my voice cracking. The courtyard was empty, but the mountain began to hum. It wasn't the red, angry pulse of the stone or the cold void of the abyss. It was a golden, steady thrum. I followed the vibration toward the high ridge, my boots crunching on the black ash. There, standing at the very edge of the floating precipice, was Valerius. He wasn't a shadow god anymore, but he wasn't entirely the man I'd met in the clearing either. Faint silver light traced the veins in his arms, and his eyes were a constant, glowing mercury. "They think they can cage the North," he said, not turning around. "They think a bit of salt water and some steel plates can hold the heart of the world." "Valerius," I said, stepping up beside him. I reached out, my hand finding his. The moment our palms touched, mark to mark, the golden light flared so bright it momentarily blinded the surveillance drones hovering above us. "We're on a boat. A very, very large mountain-sized boat." "Then we'll need a captain," he said, finally looking at me. A small, dark smirk played on his lips, the first sign of the man I'd fallen for. "I can feel the engines, Eris. They're anchored to the bedrock. They're using the mountain's own gravity to stay afloat." "If they're using gravity," I said, my tactical mind already spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, "then they're using a frequency, and I happen to be a master of interference." I looked out at the thousands of glowing eyes in the forest behind us. The Kingsguard, the survivors, the wolves who had watched their queen consume a containment field. They weren't afraid anymore. They were waiting. "Valerius, if we do this, there's no going back to the moon crest. We'll be outlaws, sovereigns of a floating nation." "I was never much for borders anyway," Valerius whispered, pulling me into a kiss that tasted like ozone and absolute freedom. We turned toward the horizon, our hands joined, our souls fused. We didn't just have a bond, we had a kingdom. And Apex was about to find out that the only thing more dangerous than a fierce queen is a king who is perfectly happy to let her steer. The roar didn't come from Valerius this time. It came from the mountain itself as we took the controls.